Yesterday, we did context of system engineering. We talked about what a system is. We went through all the definitions that are we find in the handbook. And then we also went into what system engineering was all about, what kind of value it brought in. A lot of stuff dealing with context of system engineering. So we'll get started with module 2. So module 2, and that's today, all of today, we're going to talk about managing the life cycle models. It's kind of a life cycle models, this framework, and I'm actually going to introduce my chart properly to you in terms of explaining how it's kind of all of it's positioned and things like that. If you remember, I explained yesterday, we're going to go inside out. So we're going to start with chapter 7, and then go to chapter 8, and then go back and finish up a bunch of chapter 7. Chapter 7, of course, is the organizational effort to enable projects. And then we're going to actually finish up that whole chapter 7. And then probably we'll jump in at the end of the day, talking about acquisition and supply, the agreement processes. And then we'll jump in into chapter 5 just shortly, a little bit, talking about project planning. So it's a full day ahead. Hope you don't mind. So we're trying to make sure we understand that an organization really has an incentive to actually realize a system through these projects. And we have to make sure that the organization has that capability to do it. So let's jump into the this morning's lecture, which is managing life cycle models. We'll be covering this morning from all of chapters, most of chapter 7 and chapter 8 as well. As you can see, we're slowly but surely digging into our handbook here. We already took care of chapters 1 through 3 yesterday, a bunch of the appendices we talked about. A lot on chapter 9, basically because we covered a lot of things dealing with modeling and approaches to system engineering. Today, we're going to try to finish up chapters 7 and 6. All right. So here it is. This now I know yesterday I threw this chart at you time and time again. This is my initial proper introduction to you dealing with the chart. And what I want to do is kind of separate the chart out so you can see how we kind of think about it. Number one, we think about what I want to do, just so you'll know. From now on, I'm going to be following the chart, and we're going to start with your life cycle model over here, which is part of the organizational enabling processes. And we're going to end with the final technical process over here, which is perform disposal process and all. So we're going to start this now. Now, to give you a good sense of how this chart is laid out, number one, I have the technical processes right here in the center. And the way I've laid out the technical processes is I laid it out as the classical V, okay? So the technical processes actually deal with analyzing, figuring out your requirements, figuring out the architecture, getting your design all put together, okay? Once that design's put together, because we don't know what you're building, but we do know when you're done with your design, you need to figure out all the parts that you need to bring together. So you probably need to build a bunch of the parts. So that's the implementation part. From there, you actually have to integrate it, verify it, deploy it, actually validate that it works in the mission environment, operate it and sustain it, and eventually get rid of it. So the technical processes are kind of the seminal system engineering stuff we do. All right, we do. But what's neat about 15288, and a lot of the older standards started with the design and went through, and that's where it started. What's neat about 15288 is that it actually brings into the technical management processes. Now, some standards talked about these as well, but what's neat about 15288 is it acknowledges that all these technical processes kind of surround your technical processes. So that's the way I did the chart, is just to show that these technical processes are in place to support and either control or enable the technical processes. So I also talk about the controls and then enablers here. They're part of the chart as well. All right. Oh, don't forget the life cycle model. Put that on the very bottom so you can see, because that's an important aspect to this. A lot of these processes are done during these processes here. And when you get to these final processes over here, you're actually on the right side of the V here. All right, but why do you have a project? That's the key question. 15288 answers that. It says normally there are two organizations that have an agreement with each other, or like I like to say, a contract, right? So our famous, Federal Express wants an airplane. Boeing wants to give them an airplane. So lo and behold, they have an agreement. Boeing would actually start having a project in order to build that plane, okay? Now, Boeing has to have the capability to have these projects. So the organization has to have it has to enable the project. So there are processes that enable the project in order to have these technical processes to develop your system. So all that to say is there is a lot. I know when you first looked at my chart, you may have been like, hey, that's semi-complicated with the hey, but there is a rationale to everything I show there. And I did my best that if you study the chart in depth, I actually did put every input and output. Now, there are some things that are hard to depict when they're coming in from everywhere, especially the controls and enablers. And I just kind of show them floating there. And they are part of the program and part of every process. So I hope the chart actually does indicate everything that we go through in terms of those IPO diagrams and stuff. So this chart is a kind of my hope that I take all those IPO diagrams and squunch them into one diagram is basically what I tried to do. All right. Now, have you guys been starting to read the handbook? Anybody? Has anybody gotten the handbook? So if you start reading it, you'll notice that every chapter from 4 to 8 has an intro, right? 4 to 7 usually talks about, in overall terms, what are these processes we're about to get into. And so chapter 7 is no different. So let's go through just that initial chapter. And by the way, the other way, besides the nice little table of contents where I actually show that we're digging into this, I'm also going to use this 15288 diagram to show that we are going through each process. So we're going to do chapter 7 here. All right, so there's 6 aspects to chapter 7, from lifecycle management, infrastructure, portfolio management, human resource, quality management, and knowledge management. So they talk about the fact that the project enabling processes are purview to the organization, also known as the enterprise, right? And what they do is direct, enable, control, and support the system lifecycle. So that's actually one of the reasons I go from the inside out, because yesterday we just spent half the time talking about life cycles. And so it makes sense that maybe one of the first processes we should talk about is the life cycle management process. And that, of course, that falls underneath Chapter 7. And it's part of the organizational project enabling process. And what they're trying to do is ensure that the organization has the capability to acquire or supply products or services through the initiation and support and control of projects. So everything we're going to look at for Chapter 7 is in support of the project that they're creating, which deals with either acquiring or supplying the product or service. One of the things that you should think about is notice that, sorry, I lost my, keep losing my thing. One of the things that is interesting, it says a project can be used to acquire or to supply. Okay, so our famous example of Boeing, Federal Express and Boeing may have their own project, which would actually monitor and monitor Federal Express, monitor Boeing in the creation of the airplane. So they would have their own project, right? And they would have to enable that project to do that. Now, Boeing itself would have a project to create the plane as well. Now, Boeing actually needs to acquire things as well while they're trying to build their airplane. So there is an aspect of the project being able to do both, okay, as we're going forward. All right. So they provide resources and infrastructure necessary to support projects. So that's what this chapter focuses on. Don't think of this as kind of a general business management objectives. They do overlap at times, but look, if you want to kind of organize or put together an organization, you don't want to use this handbook, okay? So this handbook just tells you what the organization needs to do to support system engineering within the project, okay? So that's kind of what we're looking at here. So organizations, if they're a supplier, right, they are the ones that would develop, produce, deploy, utilize, support, and retire a system of interest, okay, an SOI. And it would be neat to think, oh, okay, that's cool. I can wrap my head about that. I'm supplying an airplane or whatever. Well, there's more to it than that, right? Because one of the things that an organization has to do to build that airplane or whatever you're building is you actually have the development environment in order for them to do it. So they need the hangars or the manufacturing factory to build the airplane or the wings or whatever they're building, the electronics. So manufacturing is another aspect to it. The training, if you have a simulator to help the pilots, but you may also have training mechanisms for those who are manufacturing the airplane as well. What about verifying that you met the requirements of the airplane? There's a lot of demonstrations, testings, analysis that have to be done. How do you actually get the airplane where it needs to go? You have to transport parts to the factory. The logistical means to get material to where the product is or the system is in order to maintain it. And of course, you need to use it as well. And eventually you get tired of it. You want to break up with it and you want to dispose of it. All of these, right, are enabling systems that support the system of interest. It's not the system of interest, but it's everything you need to create, maintain, and use the system of interest. So a lot of these processes we're going to go through supports the project, but keep in mind, it's more than just the system we're building. We have to think about the enabling systems as well. Here are the 6 enabling processes we're going to go through. Don't forget, we can tailor them as it makes sense, right? The organization will tailor the processes and their interfaces to meet their specific strategic and communications goals or objectives. All right, let's get into it. So as I showed you, the organization is on the left side of my V. Again, just as I explained, this is the capability to acquire and supply products and services through the initiation and support and control of projects. All right, so providing those resources and infrastructures necessary to support the projects. All right, let's get into life cycle model management. Now, all these processes, just to remind you, I'll do this every day, just to remind you, we have this famous IPO diagram where we're going to talk about inputs, we're going to talk about the process, we're going to talk about the outputs, all right? And that's the famous IPO diagram. These controls and enablers will not be discussed because we already discussed them. But know that they're there on every process we talk to. All right, so to start building this program, diagram for you from the very beginning, you should kind of see what it looks like with all the processes out. So this actually shows the various areas where the processes go for their from each chapter. So as you can see over here, this is where the technical processes are. The agreement processes are here. Technical managements are this nice little pink thing here. And then the organizational project enabling processes are up here. I also show you where the controls and enablers are. Now, one of the aspects of controls and enablers is they're actually created by some of these processes. So you'll actually see them being created. The only ones that aren't are the laws and regulations. Those kind of come from the outside. And standards, they come from the outside as well. The other thing that none of these processes create, and again, it's part of the organization, should be the strategic plan of the organization. That should already be in place when we're doing this. So other than those 4 things, everything else is kind of being created. There are some other small ones, and we'll show you where they are as we start building. But some of the controls and enablers will be built by some of the processes. All right, as a matter of fact, one of the first processes is lifecycle model management. If you notice, the lifecycle model is actually created by the lifecycle model management. Okay, I show you all the outputs from here. I don't show you any inputs, but when you look at the diagram, you'll be able to see what the inputs are. So this is where the lifecycle model management is. The main purpose of the lifecycle model process is to define, maintain, assure the availability of policies, lifecycle processes, lifecycle models, and procedures for use by the organization and with respect to the scope of 15288, which is man-made systems. How do we create man-made systems? So that's the scope. So you'll actually see one of the main outputs here is a actual enabler, which are the processes here, the policies and things. So in this understanding of the purpose is actually some of the outputs as well. And you'll actually see that when we go through the IPO. So why do we do this? And I tried to talk to that when we talked about life cycle models yesterday. I was trying to explain how one of the aspects, when we went through that whole idea of sequential versus the incremental type of modeling development approaches, no matter what approach you're using, you're trying to get the ability to repeat and predict your performance across the projects in the organization. One of the things you want to think about when you look at my diagram here is the fact that one organization, Boeing, is over here, right? As we're looking at it, they'll have many projects. So they'll have a project for Federal Express that they're making, right? And then they'll have another one for the Army, the Navy. They'll build airplanes all the way to UPS. Whatever airplanes they're making, there's a project for it. And if they have their framework, which is right here, all this framework done correctly, they can figure out exactly how to make each airplane and how much it'll cost. It'll be repeatable and predictable. And when you do that, you can actually be able to cost out what these things, and you'll know what kind of resources you need. Also, if you have some, like in one of the projects, they discover a new wing design, let's say, or something. Well, you can take that wing design and take that proven success and install it in the other projects across the organizations. So that improvement idea, like we figured out a better way to do configuration management, let's say, and we can actually enable that process improvement, not only in that one project, but across the organization. The other thing is, let's say they're working on an airplane for UPS, and UPS says, you know what, this isn't working for us, we're going to Airbus. Meanwhile, you have all these people that you have already in place, right? Or already using things. But you can transfer that staff to another project, to Federal Express, because they already know the processes. They've been there, they know what's involved. So actually, that was one neat thing. I was not I was a system engineer for the Navy. I worked for the Navy. One interesting thing when I wrote my resume is I actually explained to them, I understand the life cycle models of, I didn't put in these terms, but it was way back in the day. But I explained to them, I understood the acquisition processes that are used by the Navy. And I said, you could put me anywhere in this life cycle, and I'll hit the ground running. Always thought that was a good way to explain my capability because of that aspect. And of course, any lessons you learn from one project to the other, at the end of the Federal Express project, you should, Boeing should sit down and think to itself, what did we learn from this? And can we work better with future customers or creating our future planes in order to improve these projects? And of course, Boeing, when they're starting the FedEx project, it's a new project, but guess what? They have their processes in place. They know what needs to be done. So standardizing across the project using these kind of processes and tools and other things really provides that cost savings in terms of economics of scale to support all the activities that are involved in a project. So what this does, this process, is establish and maintains those policies and procedures at the organizational level. And it provides those models necessary to meet whatever the organization's strategic plans, policy goals, or objectives are for all these projects. Now, all the projects, right, are there to support the organization. The organization is trying to make money. We're good at doing this thing, right? And I have these projects to do these things. And so that's one of the things we have to do. So this process defines, adapts, and maintains the support requirements for all the organization, the system engineering, organizational units, as well as the projects themselves and the personnel. So lifecycle model management process are supplemented by methods and tools. We'll get into that. And there are guidelines in the form of policies and procedures. All of them should be tailored by the projects, as we'll discuss in Chapter 8. So I'm going to show you this, and actually on the website, I actually have a study guide. And what I do is I show this slide and I show the activity slide, and I help you study that. And so when you, it'll be this slide plus this slide here, and they'll be on one page. And it'll be an interesting way for you to study for the exam just before you go in, or maybe a day or two, just look at each process and how it works. I usually put the purpose up there for you. You know, of course, the inputs and outputs are there. And the activities are good because it kind of gives you a sense of what happens to all these inputs and what occurs, you know, why do we get the outputs that we get? So for this one, we want to establish, assess, and improve the process. The inputs, let's go into them. I have a slide for each of these. And for the inputs and outputs, well, for the inputs, I actually have where are they coming from? And I use the acronyms or the abbreviations that I showed yesterday. So this would be tailoring, quality management of these two. By the way, if you ever have to go and you come back, right, and want to know where we are, just look in the upper right-hand corner, input, activities, output. You'll see where we're at, okay? So blue is inputs. I believe the outputs will be red. Activities are green. Again, I talked to you about the strategic plan. That is one thing that the overall organization has created. So I put it on the left side of my diagram. The organizational strategy, tailoring strategy, is coming from tailoring. We'll talk about that when we get to Chapter 8. And quality management has several information that is helpful to this process because we're trying to get understanding of how we can improve these processes. So these quality management aspects are actually pretty good things for us to get our quality better. All right. Now, let me just real quick, I'm going to go real close so that you can kind of see where these things are coming from. All right, we have the organizational strategy here coming from tailoring. And over here, quality management, which is up here, actually has a bunch of corrective actions and stuff to support the life cycle model processes. And of course, the organizational strategic plan actually is the input for all these project enabling processes. So you'll always see that as an input over here. All right. So what does this process do? It identifies, first of all, you have to figure out what are some good sources that I can use to actually figure out what my life cycle model should be. And so looking at other organizations, corporations, industry, even academia, even this handbook could be very helpful. And then you look at those sources and distill that information. And you figure out what is my appropriate set of models that I need for my